The obsidian chamber of the Krell High Council had not echoed with debate in 900 years. It did not echo now. The verdict had been written before the meeting began, and the 72 seated lords, each older than most stars in the lesser arms of the galaxy, understood that this was a ceremony, not a discussion. At the center of the chamber, suspended in a column of pale violet light, rotated the offending world. Small, blue, wreathed in white cloud, a jewel by accident, an infestation by design. Sol 3 intoned first speaker Therx, his voice rasping through filaments of crystal that grew, parasite-like, along his jaw. Designation, sapient outbreak, threat tier, negligible, containment recommendation, sterilization. A low murmur passed through the chamber, not dissent, agreement, a formality. The Krell had ruled 1,000 worlds for 40,000 years. They had watched empires rise on lesser planets and fall before they ever pierced the veil of their own atmosphere. The galaxy was a garden, and the Krell its gardeners. Weeds were pulled before they could seed. Earth, the file read, had achieved fission within a single generation of harnessing electricity. Its species had visited its own moon, then abandoned the effort. Erratic, aggressive, intelligent enough to be dangerous, undisciplined enough to be unpredictable, the very worst combination. It would not be permitted to bloom. The honor of the cleansing, Therx continued, is awarded to Grand Admiral Vasari of the 7th Vanguard. In a pillar of pale gold light to the council's left, the figure of Vasari materialized, 7 feet of armored sinew, twin tusks polished to mirrors, eyes the color of cooling iron. He had personally sterilized 14 worlds. His name was a curse in 3 quadrants. His crews believed he could not die. 4,000 vessels are placed under your command, Therx said. The Imperium expects efficiency. Sol 3 is a backwater, you will treat it as such. Vasari inclined his great head. I will not require 4,000, he replied, his voice the slow grind of tectonic plates, but I shall not refuse a feast offered. A ripple of approval, the session closed. 47 light-years away, in a place no Krell sensor had ever pierced, a woman stared at a single blinking light on a console and exhaled the breath she had been holding for 9 years. Her name was General Riacalder. She was 61 years old. She had buried 2 husbands and 1 daughter, and she had not wept for any of them in front of another human being. The desert above her bunker was silent. The fluorescent hum of the command center was the only sound for 6 floors in any direction. The blinking light meant the long-range listening array buried under the Antarctic ice had registered something. Something traveling faster than light, something making no attempt to hide. Calder had spent 40 years of her life waiting for that light to blink. She picked up the receiver of a phone that had no number anyone knew, and she said only 2 words. Wake them. 6 time zones away, in a hangar that did not officially exist, the lights came on. Grand Admiral Vasari stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Verdict and watched the stars stretch into ribbons as 4,000 vessels translated into jump space together. The fleet shimmered around him like a school of black-scaled predators, each ship a city, each weapon a mountain range of compressed violence. He had read the dossier on humanity. He had laughed. Pre-spaceflight, pre-singularity, pre-everything. A species that still killed itself over lines drawn on paper, over invisible gods, over the color of skin. A species that had, 3 centuries ago, split the atom and pointed it at itself. These were not warriors, these were children with knives. Vasari curled his clawed hand around the hilt of the ceremonial blade at his hip, the one he carried only for sterilizations, the one that had tasted the blood of 14 sapient species. 90 hours to translation, his subcommander reported. Vasari smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Tell the fleet, he said softly, to ready the harvesting protocols. There will be no need to land. He turned toward the great viewport, where a small, distant point of blue-white light hung waiting in the dark. He did not yet know that the light was waiting for him. The bunker beneath Nevada had no name. It appeared on no map. The men and women who worked inside it carried no identification, took no vacations, and spoke to no family members about the nature of their employment. They were, officially, employees of a logistics firm in Reno that processed agricultural shipping documents. The agricultural shipping documents were real. The firm was real. The cover was watertight because the people who built it had been doing this for 62 years, and they were very, very good at lying. General Calder walked the long corridor toward the central war room with the brisk, even step of someone who had practiced this walk in her dreams. The recessed lights caught the silver in her hair. Her boots made no sound on the rubberized floor. She was already composing in her head the words she would say to a planet of 9 billion people who did not know they had been protected, who did not know they had been preparing, who did not know that the largest secret in human history was about to be made not secret. The door to the war room hissed open. 43 faces turned toward her. "Status," she said. A young analyst no older than 30 swallowed once and steadied her voice. Confirmed mass translation event 90 light hours out, vector consistent with intercept of Earth orbit. Signature density suggests. She paused. The number on her screen was insulting, almost embarrassing. "Suggests," Calder prompted gently. 4,000 capital-class vessels, ma'am. Someone in the back of the room, a colonel from the Pacific desk, made a small choked sound that might have been a laugh. Calder did not laugh, but the corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. 4,000, she repeated, as if turning a stone in her hand. They sent 4,000. She stepped to the central hollow table, where the system map was already rendering, a neat blue dot for Earth, a thickening cluster of red icons sweeping in from beyond the Kuiper belt. "Activate Lighthouse," she said. "All stations, all platforms, full network." The senior officer to her left hesitated. "Ma'am, that's—" "I know what it is, Colonel. Activate it." He nodded and turned to his console and entered a sequence that had been written in 1964, refined every year since, and tested in pieces but never, ever in full. Across the planet, things began to happen. In a quiet observatory on the Atacama Plateau, an astronomer who believed she was studying pulsars received an email from an address she did not recognize. She opened it, read 3 words, and immediately walked to the wall of her office, removed a framed photograph of her daughter, and pressed her palm against the bare wall behind it. A panel slid open. She entered a code. A station she had not known existed in her own building hummed to life beneath her feet. In the Marianas Trench, a research submersible that had been stuck on the bottom for routine repairs for the last 18 months opened its hull plating and revealed something that was not a research submersible at all. In low Earth orbit, 3 communications satellites belonging to 3 different nations, each experiencing minor technical difficulties, simultaneously rotated their solar panels, retracted their dish arrays, and exposed weapon mounts the size of office buildings. In the asteroid belt, in the asteroid belt. Vasari watched the blue point grow on the view screen and felt something he had not felt in 2 centuries. It was not fear. Vasari did not feel fear. It was the ghost of fear, the tickling cousin of it, the small itch at the back of an old soldier's neck that says something is wrong and you do not yet know what. "Sensor sweep," he said. His sensor officer, a young Krell with the fresh tusks of a recent commission, complied. The holodisplay painted the inner Sol system in clean, simple lines. 9 planets, a modest asteroid belt, some satellite debris. A few dim radio sources from the Third World, the usual leakage of a pre-FTL species. "Nothing. Sweep again, active pulse this time." The young officer blinked. "Grand Admiral, the energy expenditure." "Pulse." The pulse went out, the pulse came back. For a single instant, the holodisplay flickered, and Vasari saw, just for that fractional heartbeat, 10,000 contacts where there should have been none. Then they were gone again. His sensor officer stared at the screen, then at his hands, then at the screen again. "Grand Admiral, the readings, he swallowed. "I cannot replicate, the contacts are gone." Vasari stood very still. The small itch at the back of his neck was no longer small. He turned slowly toward the viewport, toward the small blue point that should have been a slumbering rabbit and was, perhaps, something else entirely. "Battle stations," he said softly. The bridge erupted. The Krell Armada slowed at the edge of Neptune's orbit, 4,000 warships fanning out into a textbook englobement formation that Vasari had used to break 14 civilizations. The discipline was beautiful. The geometry was perfect. Every ship knew its angle, its arc, its kill lane. It was the formation of a master executioner standing over a kneeling prisoner. It was, Vasari was beginning to suspect, the wrong formation entirely. He stood at the center of his bridge, the great viewport filled now with the cold steel blue of Neptune, and he ordered the hail. His voice would be carried on every frequency the humans could possibly receive. It would be translated into every language his cultural analysis officers had catalogued in the brief weeks of approach. It would be spoken first in Krell, then in English, then in Mandarin, then in Spanish, then in 73 other tongues, descending in order of speaker count. He had given this speech 14 times. He knew the rhythm of it. He knew the precise pause that worked best between surrender and or perish. Inhabitants of Sol 3, he began, his great voice rolling out into the dark. You have been judged a hazard to galactic stability. The Krell Imperium has determined that your continued existence is incompatible with the long peace. You are offered one mercy. Surrender your atmosphere processors, your population centers, and your command structures, and you will be permitted to continue as a managed species under Imperium guardianship. Resist, and you will be erased. He paused. The pause was perfect. The pause had killed 1 billion souls on Tessari Prime by the simple weight of its silence. You have, he said, one of your hours to respond. The transmission ended. He waited. 12 seconds. The reply came. It came on every frequency. It came in every language Vasari's translators knew, and several they did not. It was a single human voice, female, calm, and not particularly old. It carried no anger. It carried no fear. It carried instead something Vasari had heard once before, a long time ago, on a battlefield where a wounded enemy commander had spoken to him from the dust just before dying. It was the tone of a person who had already decided how this would end, and was now merely informing him of the result. Grand Admiral, the voice said, my name is Rhea Calder, I speak for Earth. You believe you have come to backwater, you believe you have come to a sleeping world, you have not. We saw your kind 62 years ago. We saw the wreckage of one of your scout ships when it came apart over Siberia. We pulled it from the snow, we took it apart, we learned. For 62 years we have built, for 62 years we have prepared, we have watched our skis, we have hidden our work, we have lied to our own people because we knew that one day a ship like yours would come, and on that day we would need to be ready. You came expecting children, you will find something else. This is not a negotiation, this is a courtesy. We are telling you, Grand Admiral, before we begin what is about to happen. You will turn your fleet around, you will leave this system. You will carry word to your Imperium that Earth is not to be approached again. If you do not, you will not leave at all. You have, she said, and there was the faintest trace of something almost like amusement in her voice, one of your hours to respond. The transmission ended. The Krell bridge was silent. Vasari stared at the speaker, then at his officers, then at the small blue point on the view screen. His sub-commander, a veteran of 3 sterilizations, was the first to laugh. It was a nervous laugh, but it was a laugh. The bridge joined in. Soon the laughter rolled through the ship and out by intership comm to the rest of the fleet. 4,000 warships shook with it, the audacity, the theater of it, a pre-FTL primitive lecturing the Imperium of the Krell. Vasari did not laugh. He listened to his men laugh, and he watched the blue point, and he thought of the 10,000 contacts that had flickered for a single instant on his sensor display and then vanished. Silence on the bridge, he said. The laughter stopped. Forward formation, full advance, we will not give them the hour. His sub-commander hesitated. Grand Admiral. You heard me. The fleet surged forward. 4,000 warships abandoned their patient englobement and threw themselves toward the small blue point at flank speed. Vasari had decided in that moment that whatever the humans had built, it would be best not to give it time to wake up further. He was right about that. He was, however, far too late. Because the asteroid belt ahead of them and to either side had already begun to move. The asteroid belt in the popular imagination is a dense cloud of hurtling rocks through which spacecraft must weave with reckless skill. The reality, as anyone who has actually looked at the math knows, is that the asteroid belt is mostly empty space dotted with very far apart stones. A pilot crossing it is more likely to die of boredom than collision. which is to say, it is an excellent place to hide things. Humanity had been hiding things there for 41 years. Not all the asteroids, not even most of them, just enough. A few thousand carefully selected rocks hollowed out across decades by mining operations that had been listed publicly as failures, abandoned, written off in tax documents, forgotten. The mining had not failed, the rocks had simply been repurposed. Each one carried a fusion drive, a sensor suite, and an armament that varied by model. The smaller ones carried swarms of sublight kinetic missiles, simple slugs of tungsten accelerated to a fraction of light speed, which is to say, the speed at which mass becomes apocalypse. The larger ones carried particle lances long enough to cut a moon in half. The largest, of which there were only 9, carried something that did not yet have an official name in any human language, because the engineers who built it had agreed among themselves that it should not. When the Krell Armada surged inward at flank speed, every one of those rocks lit its drive at the same instant. To Visari's sensor officer, it looked, for one impossible moment, as though the asteroid belt itself had decided to attack. "Contacts," the young officer said, and his voice was no longer steady. "Contacts, contacts, contacts, Grand Admiral, the entire belt." "Numbers. I can't, the system is still counting." "Numbers. 6,000, Grand Admiral, 811, the officer stopped trying. "It is more than us, Grand Admiral, it is more than us." Visari did not turn from the viewport. The blue point of Earth was no longer the only thing in the sky. A constellation of new lights had bloomed across the dark ahead of him, drive plumes by the thousand, and they were not retreating. They were closing. "Initial volley," he said calmly. "Long range, saturate." The Krell fleet fired. The Krell fleet had always fired first. Lances of hot plasma reached out into the dark, beautiful and final, the kind of light that sterilized continents. The lances struck the leading wave of the human formation, and detonated against fields the Krell had not known humans possessed. It is not strictly accurate to say that humanity had reverse-engineered Krell shielding from the wreckage in Siberia. They had reverse-engineered something like it, then improved on it in ways that the Krell, in their long complacency, had stopped doing 40,000 years ago. The Krell shields were elegant, the human shields were brutal. They sacrificed efficiency for resilience and asked the engineers to make up the difference, and the engineers had made it up by the simple expedient of not sleeping for 28 years. The first volley achieved nothing. The second volley, fired before the first had fully dissipated, achieved less than nothing, because by the time it arrived, the human formation had already fired back. Tungsten at 3% of light speed does not care about shields. Tungsten at 3% of light speed is, for all practical purposes, a small star arriving in a single point. The first wave of human kinetics struck the Krell forward line and 17 capital ships ceased in any meaningful sense to exist. They did not explode. They were unmade, their atoms scattered into expanding clouds of hot plasma that bloomed across the dark like obscene flowers. On the bridge of the eternal verdict, Visari watched 17 of his ships die in a span of 4 seconds, and for the first time in 2 centuries, he felt the cousin of fear blossom into the thing itself. "Evasive," he barked, "break formation, active countermeasures, all wings." The Krell fleet, 4,000 strong and 40 millennia confident, performed the first emergency maneuver many of its captains had ever executed in actual combat. It did not save them, because behind the kinetic wave came the lances. And behind the lances came something else. In the Nevada bunker, General Calder watched the hollow display and did not smile. She had given strict orders decades ago that no one in this room would ever smile during an engagement. War was not a thing to enjoy. War was a thing to finish. "First wave reports nominal," her colonel murmured. "Krell forward line is broken. They're breaking formation, but they're maintaining advance. Visari is coming straight for us." "Of course he is," Calder said. "He has nowhere else to go." She watched the red icons on the display flicker, and in groups of 10 and 15 and 40 wink out. "Ma'am," the colonel said quietly, "shall I authorize Phase 2? Calder considered this for a long moment. The Krell had come to sterilize her world. They had announced this openly, on every frequency, in every language her people spoke. They had given a 1-hour ultimatum, and then, in the end, had not even waited that hour out. There was a part of her, the small, quiet part of her that was still the woman who had buried a daughter, that thought, let them run, let them carry the lesson home. There was another part of her, the part that had spent 40 years staring at a blinking light and waiting, that knew with cold certainty that if even one Krell ship escaped this system, the Imperium would simply send 40,000 next time. Or 400,000. The lesson, to be a lesson, had to be complete. Authorize Phase 2, she said. In the dark beyond Mars, things that had been holding their breath began to exhale. The Krell had a saying very old from the founding millennia of the Imperium: the killer who counts is already losing. It meant, in the original tongue, that a true warrior did not tally his kills, because a true warrior fought from such overwhelming strength that counting was a discourtesy to the dead. Vasari, on the bridge of the eternal verdict, was counting. He could not help it. The numbers came at him whether he wished them or not, climbing up the side of his command hollow in a column that would not stop. 43 ships lost in the first minute, 112 in the second, 207 in the third. His sub-commander, the veteran of 3 sterilizations, was screaming orders into his comm link. The screaming was not cowardice. The screaming was a man trying to be heard over the dying of an empire. Forward squadrons report shield collapse, Grand Admiral. The kinetic strikes our shields cannot resist. Then don't resist them, Vasari snarled. Evade, 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 all wings, full lateral burn. The Krell captains tried. They were not poor pilots. They were the inheritors of 40,000 years of doctrine. But the doctrine had been written for fights against species that politely accelerated their projectiles to relativistic speeds over the course of an engagement. It had never anticipated an enemy that began the fight at 3% of C and kept the throttle pinned. The human kinetic wave was simply too fast to dodge. By the time a Krell sensor officer registered the launch, the slug was already passing through his hull. And meanwhile, the human pilots were insane. That was the only word for it that Vasari's translators could find a clean equivalent for. The human fighters, the small ones, the swarming ones, came at the Krell capital ships in formations that defied every principle of gunnery defense. They flew through their own debris fields. They flew through their allies' fire lanes, trusting, correctly, that their allies would not shoot them. They cut their drives in close approach and let their inertia carry them past Krell point defense arcs, then reignited at the last possible instant on vectors no automated system was designed to track. They were not afraid of dying, that was the heart of it. They had simulated this fight for so many decades in so many variations that for them this was not the real battle. The real battle was the one they had already won in their dreams 10,000 times, and this present moment was merely the bookkeeping. They fought, Vasari realized with a slow, dawning horror, like a species that had buried the fear of death somewhere very deep and forgotten where it was buried. He had read in the dossier of a thing the humans called ace pilots, individuals who in their primitive air conflicts had downed 5 or more enemies in single careers. He had laughed at the figure. 5 was a poor showing for a Krell hatchling. The pilot designated by his sensors as human fighter lead was, at this present moment, on her 17th kill. The fight had been going on for 11 minutes. 800 light seconds astern of the eternal verdict, in the dark behind the Krell formation, the second human surprise unfolded. The Krell rear guard, a screen of 40 escort destroyers tasked with intercepting any flanking maneuver, had been watching their forward sensors so intently that none of them noticed the space behind them begin to shimmer. It shimmered the way heat shimmers above a road, not much, not enough to alarm a tired sensor officer, just enough that a careful one might have looked twice. None of them looked twice. When the human stealth ships dropped their cloaking fields, they were already inside the Krell rear formation. They were not large ships, they were not heavily armed. They had been built for one purpose and one purpose only, to be where they should not be, and to deliver at point-blank range the package that the engineers had refused to name. The package, when it detonated, did not produce an explosion in any sense the Krell could recognize. It produced a hole. A spherical region of space half a kilometer across, in which all bonds between particles, chemical, nuclear, Even the gentle electromagnetic handshakes that hold ordinary matter together simply ceased to apply for the briefest fraction of a second. Whatever was inside that sphere when the field collapsed came out the other side as a fine, undifferentiated mist of fundamental particles. 40 Krell escort destroyers became 40 expanding clouds of luminous fog. The hole in the rear formation was, suddenly, very large indeed. Grand Admiral, his censor officer's voice had gone flat now, past panic, into the dead calm of a man who has accepted that he is reporting the end of his world. Rear guard is gone, all 40 units. The signature of the weapon. I have never seen this signature, Grand Admiral. I do not know what it was. Vasari closed his eyes for a moment. He had served the Imperium for 241 years. He had crossed 9 arms of the galaxy. He had broken civilizations that the lesser races still wrote songs about, and he had broken civilizations that no one remembered at all because he had broken them so thoroughly. He opened his eyes, he looked at the hollow display. Of his 4,000 ships, 2,600 remained. It had been 14 minutes. All vessels, he said, and his voice did not shake because Vasari did not allow his voice to shake. Disengage, retreat vector, back azimuth 270, full burn, system exit at maximum tolerance. His subcommander turned to him with eyes that asked the unspoken question. Grand Admiral, we are running. We are living, Vasari said. If we live, the Imperium learns. If we die here, the Imperium sends another fleet, and another, and the killing does not end. The Krell Armada, what remained of it, broke and ran. It made it 9 seconds before the second ring of human platforms, the ones positioned behind the inbound vector, the ones humanity had towed quietly into place over the last 60 years, lit their drives. There was nowhere to run. The Krell had never, in all their 40,000 years, been on the receiving end of a closing trap. They had set them, they had perfected them. They had taught them in their war academies as a thing called the iron net, a doctrine of patient encirclement in which the prey was permitted to advance, then permitted to commit, then permitted at last to discover that retreat had been removed as an option some time ago, very quietly, by an enemy patient enough to wait. The Krell understood the iron net intellectually. They had simply never been inside one. They were inside one now. The outer ring of human platforms, the second ring, the patient ring, the one whose existence no Krell sensor had even hinted at because it had been towed into position over the course of decades on cold drives that emitted nothing, lit its engines all at once and began to close. It was not a fast closure, it did not need to be. The Krell fleet had committed to a high-velocity in-system burn, and a high-velocity burn could not be reversed in any reasonable time. Vasari's ships were in the most literal physical sense prisoners of their own momentum. They had thrown themselves at Earth too eagerly to stop. The outer ring did not need to chase. It only needed to be there when the Krell arrived. And so the Krell arrived, and the outer ring was there, and the math, which had been Butcher's math from the first volley, became the math of a slaughterhouse. Vasari stood on the bridge of the eternal verdict and watched his fleet die. He did not look away. He had killed too many to permit himself the cowardice of looking away. The sensor display showed the red icons of his ships winking out in patterns that, viewed at the right zoom level, almost resembled the brushstrokes of a calligrapher. A bloom here, a sweep there, a long, slow fade across the lower quadrant where an entire wing was being methodically reduced by a single human destroyer that did not appear, by any sensor reading, to be sustaining damage in return. His subcommander, the veteran of 3 sterilizations, was no longer screaming. The subcommander was very quiet. The subcommander was crying. Vasari did not reprimand him. There would be no reprimand because there would be no subcommander in approximately 4 minutes. Grand Admiral, his communications officer said, in a voice gone soft and reverent, the voice a Krell used at the death of a long-loved elder, "We are receiving a transmission from the human flag." Zorth. Saw 3, the same voice as before, General Calder. Vasari closed his eyes, then opened them. Play it. The voice came through the bridge speakers, calm as it had been the first time, calm as Vasari now understood it would have been even if his fleet had been winning. Ria Calder did not have a voice that changed with circumstance. Ria Calder had a voice that had decided long ago what kind of voice it would be. Grand Admiral, she said, I am going to give you something I do not give often. I am going to give you a choice. Order your remaining ships to power down their weapons, all of them, every system. Drives at minimum, weapons at 0, shields at 0. Surrender unconditionally to the platforms surrounding you. If you do this, the Imperium will lose its fleet, but you and your crews will live. If you do not, in 60 seconds we will finish what you started. Choose, Grand Admiral. You have always been very good at making others choose. Try it from this side. The transmission ended. The bridge was silent. His sub-commander looked at him with eyes wet and pleading. Visari looked at the hollow display. 1,200 ships remained, of 4,000 in 19 minutes. He thought for a brief moment of the ceremonial blade at his hip, of the 14 worlds, of the laughter on his bridge 20 minutes ago when the human voice had said one of your hours. He had not given them the hour. He had not extended even the small mercy of the wait. He thought of the Imperium. He thought of what would happen if he refused. He thought of what would happen if he accepted. Both paths, he saw with sudden, terrible clarity, ended at the same destination. The Imperium did not forgive surrender. The Imperium did not forgive defeat. He was already, in every meaningful sense, dead. The only question was how many of his crew he took with him. The crew who had laughed, the crew who had crewed the eternal verdict for him for 40 years, some of them. The crew who had children on Krell. The crew who, unlike Visari, had not personally raised the blade above any of the 14 worlds. The crew who could still live. Visari took a long, slow breath. All ships, he said, and the words came out of him as if from a great, exhausted distance. Power down, weapons cold, shields 0, stand by to be boarded. His calm officer, weeping now, transmitted the order. The remaining 1,200 Krell warships, one by one, went dark. In the Nevada bunker, General Rhea Calder watched the red icons on the display turn, slowly, to amber. She did not smile. She had given strict orders. Visari accepted, her colonel said quietly. All 1,200 standing down, no final acts. Calder nodded once. Boarding teams to all surrendered vessels, no human casualties, no Krell casualties unless resisted. Their crews are prisoners now, not enemies. Treat them accordingly. Yes, ma'am. She stood for a long moment in front of the great hollow display, looking at the cleared inner system, at the slow, drifting wreckage of 2,800 Krell capital ships that would be picked over by salvage teams for the next 3 centuries. Then she turned to her communications officer. Open a channel, she said. To whom, ma'am? She allowed herself then the smallest tightening at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile. To everyone. The transmission left Earth on every frequency, broadcast at a power that should have been physically impossible for a pre-FTL civilization. It rode wavelengths the Krell had assumed humanity did not even know existed. It propagated outward in an expanding sphere at the speed of light, and behind it, on certain quiet sub-channels that humanity had also been listening to for 62 years, it rode FTL relays seated patiently across the local stellar neighborhood. It would reach the Krell homeworld in 19 days. It would reach the nearest 7 other starfaring civilizations within 3 months. Within a galactic year, every species that had ever bothered to listen to the stars would have heard it. It was short. General Rhea Calder had written it herself, in the long quiet of a desert night 61 years and 11 months ago, and she had not changed a single word in all the time since. To the civilizations of the galaxy. You did not know we were here. We knew you were there. For 62 years we listened. We learned your languages. We studied your wars. We mapped your borders. We read your histories. We were not idols. We were preparing. Today the Krell Imperium sent an armada of 4,000 warships to sterilize our world. We have destroyed 2,800 of them. The remaining 1,200 have surrendered. Their crews are alive. They will be returned in time to their families with a message. The message is this. We do not seek an empire. We do not seek tribute. We do not seek conquest. We seek only to be left alone. Any fleet that approaches Sol with hostile intent will share the fate of the Krell Armada. Any species that contemplates the conquest of Earth should contemplate first the wreckage now drifting between Mars and Jupiter and ask itself whether the prize is worth what it will cost. We are humanity, we were never sleeping, we were learning. Do not wake us again. The transmission ended. The galaxy heard it. The galaxy thought very carefully about what it had heard. 19 days later, in the Obsidian Council chamber where the verdict on Earth had been issued, the 72 lords of the Krell High Council convened for the second emergency session in their 900-year history. First Speaker Therx was no longer first speaker. He had taken his own life with the ceremonial blade he kept under his robes when the news of the Armada's fate had reached the homeworld. 12 other lords had done the same. The chamber was thinner than it had been the last time. The new first speaker, a younger lord named Velet, who had voted against the sterilization order in the original session and had been the only voice to do so, addressed the council in a voice that was not steady. "My lords," he said, "Visari is dead. He took his own life when the human boarding parties came. His crew, however, lives. His crew has been informed by the human commander that they will be returned to us in groups of 100 over the next standard year. They are not to be harmed. They are to carry, each of them, a personal account of what they witnessed. The humans wish us to remember." "My lords, we have a choice before us. The traditional response would be a punitive expedition, a larger fleet, 40,000 warships, the destruction of Sol III to such a thoroughness that no survivor remains to remember. I will tell you plainly what I believe. I believe that if we send 40,000, we will lose 40,000. I believe that the humans have not shown us their full strength. I believe indeed that what they showed us at Sol was a demonstration, a controlled and theatrical display designed to teach. I believe, my lords, that they could have killed Visari's entire fleet. They chose to leave 1,200 alive so that the survivors could come home and tell us not to come back. That is not the act of a young species. That is the act of an old one. I propose that we listen." The chamber was silent for a very long time. Then slowly the new first speaker raised his hand, and one by one the lords of the Krell High Council raised theirs. The vote was unanimous. The Imperium would not return. In the Nevada bunker, on the day the news came back, on the day the first Krell long-range probe was detected turning away from Sol at a distance of 40 light-years, and never, in the years that followed, turning back, General Rhea Calder retired. She walked out of the bunker she had run for 40 years, and she stood for a long time in the desert sun, and she let the wind blow across her face, and she thought of her daughter, who had died at 6 of an illness that humanity, in the quiet decades of preparation, had also learned how to cure. The cure had come too late for her daughter, but it had come. Many things, she thought, came too late, and many things came in time, and the work of a life was to know the difference and not to stop working either way. She walked to her car, she drove home, she made herself a cup of tea. She sat on her porch and watched the sun set, and she did not speak to anyone for a long time. That night, for the first time in 62 years, she slept the whole way through without dreaming of a blinking light. The galaxy learned. In the centuries that followed, no fleet approached Sol with hostile intent. Trade delegations came eventually and were received with courtesy. Cultural exchanges began. Humans, when they finally chose to leave their solar system, did so as travelers, not conquerors, but they traveled with weapons, and the weapons were known to be ready, and no one who had read the history of the Krell Armada was foolish enough to test what those weapons would do if drawn. In the bars and the academies and the quiet places of 1,000 alien worlds, when the conversation turned to matters of war and peace, an old saying began slowly to take root. It was spoken in many languages, in many tongues, with many small variations, but the heart of it was always the same. Do not wake the humans were never sleeping, the humans were only learning. And that, in the end, was the name humanity earned in the stars. Not a name of conquest, not a name of tribute, a name of warning. And the galaxy, having heard the warning, was, at last, content to let them be. The end.